This happened to me in August of 2008. It was a bright, sunny morning in Window, North Carolina, around 11 a.m. I sometimes get into these moods where I don't want to be around other people for a while. This was one of those days. So I packed my travel bag with water, cigarettes, a novel, and several notebooks, and set off to an isolated area where I could relax. North Carolina provides plenty of places to sit down and enjoy the outdoors in relative comfort for several hours. I was walking down a road between the public library and a nursing home when I noticed a car trailing behind me. It was a large, filthy sedan. It looked like it was once white. Honestly, it looked like it had been resurrected from a junkyard or something. It had a loud, noisy engine. The occupant's catcalled me as they passed. This kind of thing has been happening to me since I was 10 years old, so I did what I always do. Ignored them, and made a sharp left turn into the parking lot of an apartment complex I had to pass through. From previous explorations, I knew the parking lot ended in a drop-off to a wooded gully with a creek lined with flat rocks. It was a fantastic place to cool off and hang out in the summer. In retrospect, that gully was also an ideal place to dispose of a dead body, but that didn't occur to me until well after what happened next. I was equally annoyed and nervous when I realized the car was following me. There's something about noisy engines idling behind me that crawls under my skin. It signifies that someone is there, watching. After pulling ahead of me, the car slowed down, creeping forward, while the men inside continued to call out. I had never dealt with this level of harassment before. It was a step beyond the usual nonsense I've encountered. That's why I turned into the parking lot earlier than I normally would. I wanted to be off the road as quickly as possible. When the driver realized that I had dropped out of sight, he slowed the car until it stopped in the middle of the road. Then, I heard the unmistakable sound of the car going into reverse. They were actually backing up to pursue me into the parking lot. At this point, I became terrified. I've had many nightmares about being chased, so this was literally a dream come true, just not a good one. While I've had many creepy and aggressive experiences with men before, being chased down in a car was a first. I didn't want to show weakness by breaking into a run, so I lengthened my stride, heading for the end of the parking lot as quickly as possible. I assumed that once I reached a place that they couldn't follow, they would give up. I heard them about 20 feet behind me as I descended into the gully. I nearly broke my neck in the process, but I was in a hurry. I managed to reach the big flat rocks at the bottom. I sighed and thought, well, that's the last of them. Until I heard the car pull up to the edge of the pavement, right where I had climbed over. I didn't run away immediately. I was too angry, too stubborn, wanting to believe that this was all a misunderstanding. It seemed too incredible that anyone would deliberately stalk me to this degree at 11 a.m. on a Sunday in a boring part of town. I stood on the flat rock, listening and looking up at the sedan. It was tense, but I didn't expect it to escalate any further. I could still hear the engine rattling. Perhaps one of them needed to grab something from a friend in the apartment complex. I thought I would hear them drive away any second. But then I heard the car door open, followed by the voices of at least 2 men. I couldn't make out much of what they were saying, but I heard the word fuck a lot. I don't think they could see me clearly from where they were, but I wasn't sticking around either way. The gully is heavily wooded, which is ideal for not only shade, but also, as it turned out, for hiding from dirty rednecks and big cars who don't know when to give up. I found a vantage point that hid me entirely from view and allowed me to see the sedan. I was also close enough to a nearby house that I could run for help if needed. Did I mention that I left my cell phone at home with my mom because hers wasn't working? Yeah, that's what I call bad timing. I'm sure I wasn't hiding among the trees for more than a minute. It felt longer. That's how panic works for me. My mind loses its grip on reality. Unfortunately for my blood pressure, the moment the car pulled away from the edge of the parking lot and disappeared from view, I realized that if Captain Poontang and his redneck minions were to circle the block in their shitty sedan, they could probably spot me from the road. So I ran out of the trees and back to the rocks lining the ravine, which would hide me from anyone not standing at the edge and looking straight down. I spent the next 2.5 hours sitting there, chain smoking, waiting for my nerves to settle. I would have left sooner. I was starving and running low on water, but a man was mowing grass at the apartment complex above me. After what happened, I was so freaked out that I was afraid he would say something creepy if I walked past him.
When I was 15, about to turn 16, I lived in a small town in North Carolina and used to hang out at a local bowling center with one of my best friends. Her name was Haley. My dad was in a bowling league that night, and Haley had come by to work on a class project. This was on a Wednesday night, by far the biggest league night at the bowling center, which made it a bit crowded. There were no empty tables at the lanes, so Haley and I went into a lounge in the back and grabbed a table. Once we sat down, I noticed a guy sitting at the bar watching TV and drinking a beer. I didn't recognize him, which was somewhat odd because our regulars didn't typically hang out here, especially during league nights, and most of our out-of-towners didn't know about this back lounge. It wasn't closed off to the public, but it was sort of hidden. So I figured that this guy must have just opened the door and decided to watch some TV. Haley and I worked on our project for a few minutes, and then the stranger turned around in his chair to look at us. He looked fairly young, maybe in his mid-20s at most. He smiled and greeted us, and we began making small talk. Then he asked us how old we were. Haley, being the extremely sociable and outgoing person she is, answered, telling him that she was 16 and I was 15. "Oh, so do you guys drive yet?" "I do. She doesn't because she's still a baby," Haley teased. At that time, I only had my learner's permit. They continued their conversation about what kind of vehicles they drove, and they found out that they both drove trucks. This is where the conversation got a little strange. "My truck is out in the parking lot if you guys want to come check it out. It's brand new. I'll even take you for a ride if you want." Alarms started going off in my head. This guy was a grown adult, and he knew we were jailbait, but it didn't seem to deter him one bit. Hey, my dad told me to come check in by 9. Can you come with me?" I told her as I glanced at my watch. That was a lie. My dad trusted me, but I knew I needed to get out of the situation and let this guy know that we weren't completely alone and unsupervised. He must have sensed my discomfort because then he attempted to apologize. "Oh, I know that sounded kind of weird. Sorry if I gave you the wrong idea." But what he said next made the situation even creepier. "I mean, it's not like you two would get in my truck and then I'd lock the doors and you'd wake up 8 hours later in Fayetteville." After that comment, you could hear a pin drop in that lounge. He didn't say that in a joking manner, and now he was just staring at us, not even breaking eye contact when he took another swig of his beer. Part of me wanted to ask him if we had to fill out our application before he kidnapped us, but Haley seemed to pick up that we were talking to one of Ted Bundy's long-lost sons and grabbed my arm. We both left the lounge in a hurry, looking over our shoulders to make sure we weren't being followed. I went to my dad's table and told him what happened, and he followed me back to the lounge to confront this guy. But when we opened the door, he was gone. Not even 5 minutes had passed between us leaving this lounge and coming back with my dad, and this man had disappeared, only leaving behind a half-drunk beer on the counter. We never saw him again after that night.
There is a popular urban legend dating back to at least the early 1980s about a frightened girl who was home alone one night. She had a habit of putting her hand over the side of her bed so her dog would lick it to calm her down. There are many variations of this story, but it always ends with the dog being killed and her discovering the horrifying truth that it was not her dog licking her hand. Of course, this is just an urban legend. But what if I told you that I have a true story that comes pretty close? Don't worry, no dead dogs. I know people don't like that. This is a story of a girl named Daphne who attended my high school. I don't want to reveal too much information about her, as I'm not sure if this was ever in the newspapers or not. But it occurred about 3 years ago in Charlotte, North Carolina. Our story begins as Daphne was going to bed one night during a Charlotte winter, which can get unpleasantly cold. Daphne remembered feeling restless during her sleep and groggily waking up to pull the covers back over her, which had been displaced several times throughout the night. At one point, she woke up shivering as her blanket had, once again, maneuvered its way to her waist. Without moving or opening her eyes, Daphne lay there in silence, wondering why she kept kicking her blanket off in her sleep. This had never happened to her before. That's when she felt her blanket being slowly pulled toward the foot of her bed. Imagine how terrifying that must have been, suddenly realizing you're not alone. Daphne opened her eyes to see a man at the foot of her bed, staring back at her. Immediately, she jumped up, screaming, and ran out of her room to get her parents. The intruder escaped through the window and was never caught. The police were called and found several beer cans and a knife under her bed, giving them reason to believe that the man had frequently watched her at night. How he got inside the house is still a mystery. Nobody knows if the man was planning to do something horrible to her or merely liked watching her sleep.
If you were around and can remember, think back to the weeks immediately following September 11th, 2001. Everything was America, particularly in the South, and definitely in North Carolina where I lived. There was a large number of military installations there, including a massive army base about an hour from my hometown. Nearly every car had, at minimum, an American flag bumper sticker, and a frightening number of people thought anyone who had skin darker than a potato chip was a potential terrorist. Everyone was hypervigilant, and many people took it as an excuse to become overly interested in the lives of their neighbors, sometimes out of concern for their neighbor's safety, sometimes out of the concern for themselves. I was 8 years old, and I was pretty sure my elementary school wasn't going to be a target of any massive terrorist attacks, and neither did my parents. So, my brother and I continued to walk to school each day. This was never a problem. We walked to school every day that didn't have totally awful weather for almost all of my grade school existence. My neighborhood even had paved walking trails, including one that led directly to the elementary school. I can't remember if it was recent rain flooding the creek beside the trail or just the climate in general making the bugs come out in full force. But that week, my brother and I decided to take different routes and walk along the road. This plan went off without a hitch until we were walking home one day in a black SUV with tinted windows and a giant American flag that blocked the view of the back window, slowed down to a crawl and abruptly stopped in front of us before rolling down the driver's side window. The driver was a blonde, middle-aged woman wearing large sunglasses that obscure much of her face. "Hey, it's not safe for you to walk out here," she called out to us. My brother responded with something to the effect of, "It's fine. We always walk home. We don't live far." She rolled up her window and drove a few feet ahead before screeching to a halt. Then rapidly reversed back to us while rolling down her window once more. She then yelled, "You little bastards! You spit on my car! You need to get in my car right now so I can drive you home to your parents so you can apologize in front of them." We both shook our heads, and I called back, "We didn't spit on your car. Look at the side." "Get in my car right now so I can take you home," she responded. Without another word, we took off running into the nearby forest. My heart was pounding. I never turned back, but I did hear her door opening and closing. We just kept running. We switched back and forth through the streets and the woods, taking several different paths before finally circling back around until we were home. We just sort of shrugged it off as, yeah, that was weird. Until maybe 15 years later, when I told the story to a friend, and their eyes grew wide. "You know she was trying to kidnap you, right?" Back in those days, I wasn't aware of things like human trafficking. If we had gotten into that SUV, we would have never been seen again.
Shout out to Gemini Reads for helping me out with today's video. You can check out his channel by clicking the link in the description.